Hello, everyone. Welcome back to just another Esports podcast. Once again, you're joined by me, your host, Nicholas Shady Bacon, and your co-host, Mr. Kevin Hubris. This past weekend, not 2 weekends ago because of that delay, getting this episode out in some crunch time here. This past weekend, we had the Minnesota home series, and so we'll be going over our abysmal predictions from that event. Then we'll dive into our Paris predictions for that event that is coming up in just a day, since I'm going to try to get this out tomorrow. So super crunch time for this podcast. But I say we jump right into it. And I don't want to say that there was like too much of a key word for this event outside of, I would say, upsets, but even still, you could kind of say honeymoon phase for some of these teams.
We can't do that for two episodes in a row.
I know we can't do that 2 episodes in a row, but like you looked at what happened at the past event at the Seattle homestand, where the two teams that made roster changes made it to the grand finals. And in this one, all the teams that made roster changes performed pretty darn well. And we'll kind of dig into that a bit with like Seattle, the Gorillas, and then Florida.
You know what? You know what the key word is for this event? I'll come up with it this time. Since you had it last time. Keyword for this one is equity. The GA change was way more successful than I thought it was going to be. And aside from all the spawns and stuff changing again in CDL servers since they moved the privates to 60 hertz for the league, there's been a lot of things that have changed. And I think they've changed to make the league a little bit more of an even playing field. So this weekend, you could definitely see it. I mean, everybody was playing at roughly the same playing field, with the exception of Toronto, but we'll get there whenever we cover them.
I will cover them in our first match that we'll be diving into, but yeah.
So, equity, right? When we talk about equity, we don't say like it's an equal game for everybody. We're saying that the teams that weren't doing so hot with the previous GAs are doing a lot better with the new GAs, and the teams that were really exploiting them and doing well are doing significantly worse, like Chicago. So I think that, as time goes on, people will get used to it, and, you'll start to see things again. But this is really shaped up to be a really, really even set of teams throughout the entire league. I mean, at this point, it just doesn't seem like there's one team that's just absolutely unbeatable anymore. So I think that's what we call equity, and that's the key word for the week.
Okay, I can dig it. Ties in with the kind of message behind that Minnesota event that we did have. And so I think we're going to dive right into it. And the first match that we did see on that weekend was the Toronto Ultra versus the LA Gorillas. I think both of us thought this could potentially be an incredibly close series simply because these teams are known to be good S&D teams. When we talked about Toronto and when they made it to the semifinals and put up a really close performance against Optic Gaming when they were on the rise, we said this team is one that takes series to the distance, and the reason that they're able to do that is because they're decent in hardpoint and dom. They're not great, obviously, if you look at their records in those game modes, but their S&D, they play teams extremely tight. And even with losing all of their S&Ds this weekend, so now their record in S&D is 8-12. They still have their round total is 91 round wins to 90 round losses. So they're still above 50%, which is crazy to think since they have a pretty baddish record in search at 8-12. That's on like the lower end of the league. And so that's still impressive. That's one of the reasons that they're able to drag these series out. However, LA Gorillas looked unreal in S&D this weekend, and they have looked pretty good in S&D throughout the season. There hasn't been too many weekends where they've had a negative win percentage in S&D, and so that's where I gave Toronto the 3-1 edge in this. I said, they'll probably lose that S&D. Like, that's what I was thinking there. I thought they might lose that S&D because LA Gorillas has been looking to potentially be the better S&D team. However, I did not see Toronto losing respawns to this LA Gorillas team. And I think when we made our predictions, we didn't know that Spark was coming out and Saints was coming in.
True.
Even with that, I still think I would have given the edge to Toronto. However, another factor that we did not know was that Toronto was unable or refusing to practice with Classic because he wanted to go home to visit his family, which is in a situation that I'm not going to go into simply because I feel like some people have talked about it and explained it better than I have on other podcasts, such as the Codcast or Hard Points, or even Lando talking about it in his segments on, I believe, the Envy YouTube channel or MVTV, something along those lines. I feel like people have kind of covered that topic enough and given some very good opinions on it, so I don't want to go into that too much. But not being able to practice for however amount of time leading into this event definitely hurt this Toronto roster, and it showed.
Yeah.
And it's not to say maybe even if they had gotten that practice, they would have been able to beat LAG. LAG was able to pick up a couple of respawns at this event. They picked one up against Toronto, they picked one against Chicago, and they picked one up against Atlanta. They picked up 3 hardpoint wins. They lost 5 hardpoints, so they had a 3-5 record on hardpoint this event. And then for Dom, they went 1-3. Their only win in Dom they picked up against Atlanta. So they definitely still struggled in the respawns. However, they were able to pick some up here and there.
I think every point that you've made so far has been really good. After I heard that Toronto hadn't practiced, I pretty much discounted them from this tournament. And it's one of those things that doesn't really show in our predictions. Is sometimes you just don't like you see news after the fact, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, if I had known that they weren't going to practice, then I probably would have called that differently. I mean, we already beat the horse dead on this. The same thing that happened with Seattle. Seattle didn't practice because they were anticipating some roster change or something like that, which is stupid. But Toronto is kind of the same boat. You have 10 guys. You can't sub somebody in there just to practice, kind of play his play style or anything like that.
Yeah, and I
Shoot.
don't know if they were subbing someone into practice with instead of Classic, but if they were, I would have just said, all right, Classic, go home, visit your family. We're not going to practice with you while you're there since we have all these teams at our facility still. We're going to sub someone else in to fill your position until you come back, maybe.
Right.
If like that to me makes logically that makes the most sense. So then you still get practice in, and you're not switching that player out when it comes around to game time. So
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
able to actually progress as a team during that time that other player leaves.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, it hurts to lose Classic and everything like that, and I'm sure that they never wanted that to happen, but at the same time, it was the same thing with Florida. I mean, they had to drop Pristini for personal reasons. It's fine. Like, I'm not mad whenever players need to take time for themselves. I mean, you know, we talk about the NFL or anything like that. Players get injured all the time, which we did have an injury during this tournament as well.
Yeah, well,
It happens. Stuff like that happens, but it's on the team to say, all right, cool. Well, we need to figure out how to do it without this guy. So, substitution should have a bigger role in this, and it should be pretty much unacceptable. It shouldn't even be thought of that a team could go without practicing. You do
yeah, I don't
scrimmage for
know.
four or
I don't
five.
know if they were just not practicing or if they were just practicing with someone else. Because honestly, it would have made if they weren't practicing with at all. Like that's just stupid of them. Like we've talked about that
Right.
enough. But like if they were practicing with another player during that time, to me it would have made more sense if they just stuck with that player going into this event.
Right, and I
But
mean the GA changes, while they don't seem like a lot, they did impact quite a bit. And I mean you can see it through the gameplay. The GA changes were important enough to warrant a lot of different little strategy changes throughout the entire weekend. So when you bring a guy like Classic back and he's missed, well, let's say probably a good week of of the GAs out of the 3 weeks that it's been out, or 2 weeks at that point. No, yeah, 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks has been out, half the time, things go a little different. So yeah, I don't think that was a smart play for them. Fortunately, they don't really have a whole lot to lose, so I mean, this was just a chalked event for them.
yeah, I think they definitely have something to lose here, especially since it was against the Gorillas. These are some of the teams that are fighting for that kind of top 8 position so that they
True.
don't have to start in the losers bracket. I think that's incredibly important. I know there was a stat thrown up on the broadcast where I believe they said to get top 8 towards the end of the season, you're probably going to have around 110 points. And
Wow.
with only 4 events left, and I think Toronto's going to be at only 2 or 3 of those. It's definitely getting to crunch time. A little more crunch time for LA since I think LA is only at 2 more events throughout the year. But yeah, it's definitely getting down to the wire for a bunch of these teams to get those EDL points so that they can make that top 8 and potentially not start in that losers bracket. So, but props to the Gorillas. They took the first hard point, and then they took both S&Ds pretty convincingly. Those were both 6-3s. Got obliterated in the fourth hard point, the Hackney hard point, not Hackney Dom. They also got blown out in the Hackney Dom. So they still need to work on respawns. Definitely, I think that is something that we'll see maybe some improvements going into the next event. Obviously not this upcoming one since they aren't going to be there, but the ones after that, if they want to move up the standings, that's definitely something they're going to need to improve on, and then keep their S&D up to snuff, which was stellar this weekend.
Yeah,
But
definitely
moving
was.
on to probably another surprising match, and maybe even more so, was the Seattle Surge versus the Atlanta FaZe. Now, I thought I messaged you during this match. I was like, Seattle's up 2-0 against Atlanta. And we had both just given up on Seattle. And I was thinking, like, okay, maybe if I want Seattle to win, I just need to say that they're going to lose everything. Like, I just need to give up hope on them. And then, no, they failed in the end. But this was a much fresher breath of life from the Seattle Surge. Obviously, Seattle, they did lose Karma. Karma retired.
Rip Karma.
Rip Karma. This game did him in. Infinity Ward just really knows how to make Call of Duties that make COD pros want to pull their hair out and just retire. I mean, they did it to TP, and now they did it to Karma. Who's going to be next during the IW game? Maybe they get Crimsix to retire because, oh boy, they're not that great at making competitive Call of Duty games. Let's just say that. But yeah, this was a shocker. They played incredibly close in the search, which I think was probably the biggest surprise, even outside of going up 2-0. I mean, they took that first search to destroy 6-5, and then on St. Petrograd, that one, Atlanta FaZe took 6-5. So the searches in this series were the closest out of any of the matches. And when you see Atlanta FaZe going up against Seattle Surge, that's not the first thing that comes to your mind. And so it's quite interesting to kind of see that dynamic shift in the Seattle Surge with the introduction of Proto into the lineup over Karma. And so they did keep Pander since they had gotten more S&D repetitions on with him. And so Enable's not going to be playing throughout the rest of the season. And I think this Seattle Surge lineup, this probably was more so just a shock to kind of the rest of the teams. It's like, oh, this isn't the same Seattle Surge. This is a more, I guess, kind of S&D Seattle Surge, maybe, or just
hilariously
their
enough.
their strats or the way they played had shifted hard enough that it took teams by surprise. I think it's more so that. I think as the rest of the season progresses, I don't think we're going to be seeing Seattle Surge play teams this close in search, especially the ones that are as proficient in it as Atlanta FaZe or as your Dallas Empire or your LA Gorillas. And so I don't really know kind of what to think about this new Seattle Surge roster. I'm definitely going to have to see them a lot more before I really develop any positive opinion on them. They did look better this weekend. I mean, they potentially could have beaten Atlanta FaZe. And I hate saying, oh, they could have beaten them, because in the end of the day, you didn't beat them. And so when teams said, oh, we should have won this hard point if we just made one or two if we made one or two less mistakes here or there, I hate when players say that, because you made those mistakes, so you lost it. If you go back and maybe you don't make that mistake here or there, maybe the other team doesn't make a mistake here or there that got you points. So
Right.
in the end, like that, saying that, I hate that. It's a stupid statement to say, because at the end of the day, you lost it. And if you go back and play it again, the outcome can be different or the same. It's just up in the air at that point. So,
Well, to counter that, and I know I'm probably gonna make you, along with a bunch of other Seattle Surge fans, mad, but I do have to bring up the fact that there was a technical break that was far, far, far too long for any technical break possible. And that really, really killed Seattle's momentum. I mean, imagine if that technical break wasn't there. And, Seattle's up 2-0 over FaZe. 45 minutes later, they play another game, and then Atlanta kind of figures everything out and 3-2s them. I'm not saying that, that hurt immensely, but it definitely felt like the wind was taken out of Seattle's sails and they couldn't ever get that footing back. And it was simply just because of the break. So I know that Octane voices frustration, and CDL actually changed the rule, and they said, 30 minutes is the longest we can let any technical break go
I think
for
it's
now.
20.
Or 20,
It's
sorry.
20.
Yes,
Yep.
20 minutes for any technical break. So this was kind of surprising on that end as well. I mean,
Yep.
you hardly see a player. And I mean, the funny thing is Octane out of everything was like, I don't care if they find me. Like, this is stupid. He was very outspoken on the fact that this break shouldn't have taken the time that it did, and yet they felt like it cost them the map or the match. Which, I mean, it's hard to tell at this point. I personally am a big believer in momentum, and I mean when you're up 2-0 against a team, it's pretty hard to get reverse swept. If there's a team to do it, it is the Atlanta FaZe, even after this weekend. But I think that that technical break was kind of uncalled for, and I'm sure that all the Seattle Surge fans are pretty salty about it.
I'm not salty about it. I'm kind of indifferent at this point since I've somewhat been on that broadcast side, and I do agree 45 minutes is probably way too long for that to have been an issue. I didn't even realize it was that long, honestly, because during that entire series, I was playing Breath of the Wild on my Switch. And so it didn't feel like 45 minutes, it felt like 20 minutes. But so, if anyone is confused, there was a technical issue that happened that was stopping the broadcast from going back up. And so, the new rule that they came out kind of after this to try and keep competitive integrity while also trying to keep it so that the broadcast, we do give some leeway to get the broadcast up in case there is a technical issue like this, is the 15 plus 5 rule, which means that if there's a technical issue, that brings down the broadcast. They'll try for 15 minutes to get it up. If they are unsuccessful in that 15 minutes, then they are granted 5 additional minutes if they think that by the end of it, they can get the broadcast up and working again. If they do not, then play will resume without a live broadcast. And so, where my kind of mindset comes into this is, let's say it's somewhat of a different scenario because yes, they could still play the match. There wasn't anything stopping them from doing so. But with the online league, there's no live spectators. And so if the broadcast goes down, that's all of your spectators.
True.
And I can almost guarantee you this is Seattle Surge versus Atlanta FaZe. Seattle's up 2-0 against the Atlanta FaZe. What everyone would have been way more up in arms if they decided to play this entire match off stream. Can you believe it if they played this entire match off stream and Seattle wins? This
Yeah.
is the last seeded team against the first seed team. The team with the least amount of CDL points versus the team with the most amount of CDL points. 12th place versus first place, and they're up 2-0. And you're telling me that if they decided to play the match without broadcast, people would not have been more infuriated if they had just played it without the broadcast and Seattle won. Like, people would have been way more furious, I think, if they had continued play without broadcast. And like, when people are going back to it now, they're like, yeah, this is stupid. Why was there this huge delay? But I guarantee you, like, if they had done it the other way, people would have been as angry, if not more angry. And I want to compare this to, like, okay, let's say the NBA, the lights go out. They're going to stop play. Teams' momentum's going to go away, but you're back on even footing. Yes, you don't have that momentum advantage, but it's just you already have like a 5-minute break after that series. Between maps 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, there's a 5-minute break. That's supposed to be that momentum reset
Right.
in a sense. That's when there's usually the bathroom breaks for the pros because they drink an obnoxious amount of water and have to go to the bathroom every 20 minutes. Still don't understand how they manage that when you got people on like League of Legends where they're in games for, I think the longest match in LCS history is like an hour and 30 minutes or something. Like, they're not pausing for a bathroom break. So you guys, I don't know. You just got to get your bladder under control
Gotta
or
hold it.
something.
I don't
I mean,
know.
I don't want them. I don't want them like pissing themselves, but like I don't understand how they got to go to the bathroom so often. That part, but that's unrelated. We'll move past that.
All right.
But yes, I agree. 45 minutes is too long. Yes, I do like that this new rule has come into place. However, I think the outrage over it is a little over the top. And I don't want to
All right.
say it changed the outcome of the series definitively. I know there's some momentum aspect and whatnot, but at the end of the day, you already got a 5 minute kind of momentum reset in between 2 and 3, and you're back on equal footing. And if you can't beat a team on equal footing, then I'm sorry, at the end of the day, you're just not the better team. So
Yeah,
that's
I
how I'm
guess.
looking at this.
I don't know. Like, yes, I agree, but I think also Atlanta had a good amount of time to adjust and make changes. I don't know. I think the series would have definitely gone differently if there wasn't the big technical break in the middle, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say, and it's actually impossible to say because at the end of the day, there was a technical break, and this is what happened. So one thing I will commend Seattle on, kind of just looking at their stats for this event, was at least in the respawns, and more specifically, I guess looking kind of at their hard point, they had a pretty good disparity of true engagement success. That was one thing when I was looking kind of at the teams and some of the stats that I feel kind of give a little more weight is they had a pretty darn good true engagement success rate. All the players were pretty much around 55%, which I think is kind of like the benchmark for pretty good, slightly above average. And then you obviously had Octane, who was at 62, but that's just Octane being Octane, having kind of 4 players able to run in front of him.
Yeah,
But
that's
it
true.
should be interesting to see how Seattle performs going forward from here. But I think with all that said, to keep things moving along, we're going to move along to our next matchup, which was the Florida Mutineers versus the Chicago Huntsmen. And once again, Florida takes the series over to the Chicago Huntsmen. This time it was a 3-2 over them. Chicago took the first hard point, 250 to 239. They took the second hard point. For some reason on here, it's labeled Ramazda S&D on Easy Max stats, but they took the Ramazda hard point, game 4, 250 to 204. And then Florida took the Arklov Search and the Ramazda Search and the Hackney Dom. Hackney Dom was probably the closest of the maps that they did take. They took that a 154 to a 146. And then the Arklov and the Ramazda S&D, they took that 6-3 and 6-4 respectively. Arklov S&D wasn't really close. Ramazda S&D, honestly, even though it was a 6-4, it wasn't really close either. You had kind of scump going off, but throughout this series, I want to say Pristini and Arcides did not do all that well. If I'm going to go
Yeah.
to the overall stats, I think for them, yeah, they both, their S&D was actually, Alex Arcides was really bad. His S&D in this series, he was at a 0.53.
Jeez.
So
Yeah,
really uncommon for him. And they still did take the hard point respawns. And I saw some teams saying Florida is the best hard point team in the game. And I'm looking over at Chicago. Chicago took both hard points off of Florida. And even with them bowing out in 5th through 6th at this event, Chicago, I believe, they only lost one hard point. Yeah, so they had a 4-1 record in hard point, going on the longest hard point win streak of 11.
that's pretty
So,
impressive for sure.
yeah.
I think whenever I originally said, that Florida was the best hardpoint team in CDL right now, I think that I was I kind of discounted these games, and I shouldn't have. I do think that Chicago is. You're right. I think Chicago is still the best hardpoint team in CDL, but man, did they just drop the ball on Search this entire weekend? I mean, it was embarrassing,
Yeah,
flatly.
I think I think if any team, they definitely probably shouldn't have dropped the searches to the Florida Mutineers. I can definitely see them dropping them to the Gorillas. It's a little more respectable dropping the S&Ds to the Gorillas, since the Gorillas at this event in S&D almost went undefeated in it. Their
True.
search, they went 5-2, only dropping S&Ds to the Atlanta FaZe, where they had a 6-5 or round 11 on Piccadilly, and then they went all the way to round 10 on Gunrunner. So, and that's is quote unquote the best S&D team in the game. Gorillas currently third best round win percentage in Search and Destroy,
Right.
just behind the Dallas Empire and the Atlanta FaZe. So, however, you look at the Florida Mutineers, and they're one of the worst S&D teams in the game. I believe they're the third worst overall round win percentage S&D team in the game at 45%. And that's something that I didn't think, that's a game mode that I didn't think the Chicago Huntsmen would drop to the Mutineers.
True.
Usually when they've been losing to the Mutineers, they've been dropping the respawns, they've been dropping DOMs, they've been dropping hard points. However, took both the hard points in this series. And I mean, their S&D looked pretty darn good. The Chicago Huntsmen did at the last event that we saw them at. They went
Yeah.
3-1 in that. And so after that weekend, they had, I believe, was a 16-8 record in S&D. And this weekend they went 1-4 in S&D. So a drastic shift. The only S&D they took was against Toronto, who we said is one of the better S&D teams, and they got absolutely bodied by the Gorillas in S&D, which we'll talk about later. But against Florida, that's definitely a team I think they should have been able to take searches off of. And I guess maybe with them adding Awakening as a little more of an S&D minded player to their lineup, then I guess maybe you could consider Mox. I don't really know Mox's S&D background, but throughout the broadcast, a lot of people were hyping up kind of Awakening as this S&D minded player, and so I'll just kind of go with that description of him. But some of it might just come down to Florida was playing the S&Ds a bit differently than Chicago kind of was thinking they would, and since S&D is kind of one of those more structured game types where I find it kind of a little bit maybe harder to adapt throughout a series than it might be in kind of the hard points. The hard points, you get that through that first rotation, and you might have been like, okay, well, this is how they're playing it. We saw how they were playing, and you can make that adjustment mid game. I feel like for S&D, it's slightly more difficult to make kind of these mid game adjustments
Right.
because you're on attack or defense, and then you switch. And so you might be in a two-hole deficit simply because you didn't know what they were going to do on offense, and then you didn't know what they were going to do on defense, and you try and execute your game plan on either, but it might just work out. And then all of a sudden you're back on the opposite side, and you're like, okay, wait, what did they do when they were on offense? They may not even remember what they did
Yeah.
at that point.
Chances.
And
Well.
there's a lot more strats. It's not as like repetitive where in CS:GO you have a bunch of offensive rounds and a bunch of defensive rounds where if like a team's doing this over and over again, or if they're making these slight adjustments over and over again, then teams are going to be able to kind of pick up on those tendencies a
True.
lot more quickly mid-series than they would if they're switching every other round, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, even playing in the attack defense, you do pick up on what players do and everything. You'll find out where their sniper likes to sit or whatever, and then. But I mean, people do make a lot of adjustments, a lot of minute adjustments. People will break differently, even on defense and offense, et cetera, et cetera. It's I don't want to say it's a crapshoot, but a lot of this, and Florida kind of proved this to a fault, was that a lot of it is just playing your life in this and being able to escape from the fast time to kills and all of that. And before we were like, well, you need to just get the trade, you need to focus on the trade. Yes, the trade's still important, but what we're finding is more important is just staying alive is a lot better. Keeping that man advantage and regrouping in a different way can be a lot more effective. So we're starting to see more of a Black Ops 4 sort of search and destroy, where teams are getting a lot more comfortable with it and they're getting a lot faster. Because they're getting faster, it means that these search rounds are seeing a lot of more complex strat over time, and things are a little bit more fluid. So I think that Florida did really, really well this matchup against Chicago. I know that the hard points weren't something to be they left something to be desired, but after this match, their hard points way, way better. Oh my gosh, unbelievable.
Yeah, and I mean the hard points, they were close. It was 250 to 239 and 204 to 250. So those are
Right?
relatively
Yeah,
like
definitely close.
respectively close hard points, especially when they were getting outslayed. However, after that series, they didn't get outslayed in a single hard point. So, and they won all of those. They ended the weekend with a 6-2 record in hardpoint.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Like a perfect performance from Huntsman, or not from Huntsman, the Mutineers as far as hardpoint goes after Chicago. That's the way hardpoint should be played now. If I was gonna say, challenger teams out there, people who are just running GBs or anything like that, if you're wanting to watch film, watch the Mutineers film on how they've been playing hardpoint because they take a bunch of guys who realistically don't have any right to do as well as they're doing in CDL, and they are now consistently making finals appearances and are one of the best teams in CDL. So they got to be doing something right, I'm throwing it up to Strat. Yeah, Skies is nasty, Barrow's nasty.
Yeah, and it's funny because like before this event, we were like, yeah, Pristini's going to come out with the fire against his old team. They're going to beat
True.
them. I like, what did we even say? Did we say 3-1 or did we say 3-0? Like we both said it was going to be 3-1 Chicago over Florida, and
Yep.
it went the other way for Florida. They took it 3-2 over Chicago, and so that's two more maps that we didn't see Florida taking in this series, which is quite a significant shift in our eye, or at least in my eyes, and probably yours as well. And I don't know, like there were certain things I saw this weekend where I'm like, they're playing this way differently. They're somewhat ahead of the curve, I think, for some teams. But I don't know if I really felt that when I saw Florida playing. I felt like when I saw Florida playing, it was more so, at least in some of the series, like well against later on who they play Gorillas, they beat them.
Yep.
If they're playing hard point this close against the Huntsman, that's kind of I would say to be expected. And then they played the Dallas Empire, and then they played the Atlanta FaZe. Against the Atlanta FaZe, like honestly, this weekend Atlanta played hard points they played their respawns incredibly sloppy this weekend.
True.
It did not look cohesive in any shape or form throughout the entire weekend. The respawns for the Atlanta FaZe, it was just not a good look at all. And that's the second time we said that for this team, which is a bit worrying. Now, some of the meta shift or the GAs might have affected that a bit. However, I would have hoped that that kind of change wouldn't have affected it this severely as it looked to have. And I don't
Well,
know if I want to say that it's just that reasoning or if it's that these are issues that are just come back up to them. That it's maybe a little bit of a habit that they have to break is playing it cleanly or not uncleanly is the habit they have to break. Playing it cleanly is the habit they want. But
no, I think you're not wrong. And I guess are we talking about Atlanta now or
no, we're not talking about
okay.
Atlanta. It was a bit of a tangent, but if you have something to say about Atlanta, you can definitely talk about it now since
Um
we'll probably discuss it later, and it would save us some time to just bring it up now, I
True.
guess.
We did see probably one of Priest's most historic, like historically bad events.
Yeah,
They still went to the finals.
this was an
So,
incredibly bad event for Priesta. Yes,
and it
he
was an
was at a.
incredibly good event for Celium, and Simp was not where he needed to be.
I mean, Simp
But
was at a 1.11. Celium was at a 1.04. Major Maniac was at a 1.12. Abizi at 0.91, and then Priesta at a 0.82. So that's definitely a stat line that I would say they could have won with. However, there were certain maps where Priesta was just a non-existent figure on the map. And I think that's reflected in his true engagement success, where he's at a 49.5%, which is one of the lowest. It's the fourth lowest overall on the weekend.
yeah, and like I said, it was just a bad event for Priesta, which translates into an off event for Atlanta FaZe. And if an off event for Atlanta FaZe means they lose in the finals, I wouldn't be mad if I were Atlanta
Yep, they were definitely tested to get there, though.
for
They
sure.
went, yeah, every match they played went to a game 5 outside of their finals against Florida that they lost 3-1. And since we just spoiled it, I guess, spoiler, Florida won the event. I think we've said that before, but their stat line, not a single player on their team went negative. And so if you see that, you're saying, yeah,
Yeah,
they won the event. You
for
had
sure.
Pharaoh even at a 1, Frosty at a 1.1, Havoc at a 1.05, who's the entry guy. So if he's at a 1.05, that's already extremely good.
Also the
You had
team killer, because
you had a Awakening at a 1.21, and then
beast.
you had Skies at a 1.32 with the highest KD overall at the event. So
Yeah, I mean
yeah, if that's your stat line as a player or as a team overall at the event, your average KD is, I'm going to do it here. Your average KD as a team is a 1.1. Yeah, you're probably winning the event.
yeah, easily. And honestly, they were playing the best competition in the game to get where they were at.
Yeah, they
Um,
had to beat the Huntsmen.
Huntsman, Dallas,
They,
and Atlanta.
yeah, they had to beat Huntsmen, Dallas, and Atlanta. The top 3 teams in terms of CDL points in the league. So
Yeah, I mean
it's
this was
definitely
this was
a
a big earned
respectable
win
win.
for them.
It was a huge win. Yeah, definitely. A win that I would say probably moves them into top 4. I would put them on even terms with Chicago Huntsmen. I'm not putting them on even terms with Dallas or Atlanta at this point, even though they beat both of them. Yes, in Dallas, not so much convincing fashion. It was an incredibly close series. I would say Atlanta in relatively convincing fashion, since it was a 3-1 and the respawn game modes were a bit of a stomp in
Yeah,
in Florida's favor. But simply because, even though what you said, yeah, Atlanta looked bad this weekend, they made it to a final, and Dallas looked incredibly good this weekend also. The reason I'm not putting Florida in that conversation with them is simply because they've had some lulls throughout the season. So that's what worries me.
true.
That's why I'm keeping them with Chicago, who's also had a lull. Dallas only had realistically one bad event, whereas Florida and Chicago have had multiple. They've
Multiple bad
had
events at
two
this
two or
point.
three bad events at this point. Yeah. So Atlanta hasn't had a bad event yet. They've only ever been knocked out. The lowest place that they've had is 3rd/4th. So they're definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. And Dallas has been looking incredibly dominant recently, and that's why I think they deserve to stay where they're at. But
True.
we're going to get back to our matches, since we do got to keep things moving along, which is our Minnesota Rocker versus Dallas series. Minnesota Rocker took the Ramazda Hardpoint 250 to 232, but then they lost everything after that. It was 3 straight St. Petrograd. It was St. Petrograd S&D, Dom, and then Hardpoint. And Dallas took all of those over the Rocker, ending the series 3-1. And so we'll discuss it kind of, I guess, maybe going into our next series with the Rocker about the substitution that take place. However, I just want to state now, it's the curse of the home series. The homestand events are cursed. Rocker got out in 7th/8 at their homestand event. Pretty much every team that's had a homestand event has looked absolutely crap at it, outside of London, since they made it to a semifinal, and then Atlanta because they won theirs. Every other team, though, homestands are a curse, and so I'm very worried for Paris going into theirs this weekend. You know for a fact I am not giving them a single win this week, coming
My
up this weekend,
gosh.
as a result of the homestand curse. I'm standing by it until someone outside of Atlanta proves me wrong. Yeah, I mean, there's not even another Atlanta homestand event, so it's just, yeah, there's no team's gonna do good at a homestand event the rest of the season. That's my prediction. It's my bold prediction for this episode. But
Bold
that's,
prediction.
yeah,
Uh,
incredibly bold prediction that I'm having. But gonna move on to our match 5 that we saw, which was Florida Mutineers versus the LA Gorillas. We got both of our Group A matches predictions right, so that was Dallas and Atlanta. We got both of those right. We got both of our Group B predictions wrong. And so what that means is that we actually got the predictions right in reverse way, because we did predict a Florida versus Gorillas matchup.
true.
However, did we get that right? I think we got that right. We did both get that right. Did we get that
Yes.
right?
Yeah, we had let's see.
Yes,
Yeah,
we had Florida
yeah, we
being
had Florida beating
Gorillas,
Gorillas. And
3-1.
I had
Cool.
him 3-1, and the actual result was 3-1. So
Yes, we both had that, so you don't get to feel special at all. Sorry. But and then we predicted a Chicago Toronto matchup. However, we did not predict that to be in the losers bracket. And so Florida did take this matchup over the Gorillas, so they advanced onto the semifinals in the first seeded spot. The Gunrunner Hardpoint was pretty close. It was a 250 to 222. S&D Piccadilly was actually really close. And so at this point, I was like thinking, okay, maybe Florida's actually good at Surge, but they ended up going 3-3 in Surge on the weekend. So I'm not going to say that they're definitively a good Surge team. I would say that they're pretty average. And I think that kind of shows in their Search and Destroy stat line. Yes, they had an incredibly long losing streak in Search of 7 searches in a row, kind of in the middle of the season. And they've somewhat started to turn that around, kind of going 50-50 on weekends. And so now they're at an 11-17 record in Search and Destroy. However, they still have the third worst overall round win percentage. And so I'm going to stick with that. They're kind of going 50-50 now, bit up in the rise. Maybe Piccadilly's one of their better maps, since we didn't see them play that against any other team. And we know that the Gorillas are an incredibly good Piccadilly team since they played that a couple times throughout the weekend. But yeah, the Gorillas take that 6-5 over the Florida Mutineers. And then the Florida Mutineers just absolutely stomped the LA Gorillas on St. Petrograd Dom. That was a 177 to 126. And then they crush them on the Ramazda Hardpoint 250 to 110. And Florida's one of the teams that likes playing Ramazda Hardpoint. And the Gorillas is also one of
which
those teams. And so when you have a team, two teams that like playing oddball map, I would say at this point,
yes.
the team that has the better Slayers is going to beat you. And Gorillas don't have the better Slayers on their team.
No,
Uh,
I 100% agree with that. I mean, Blast is great and all, but we already covered it. Florida Mutineers pulled a 1.1 as a team. So that's yeah.
if we look at only, do we have only the Gorillas S&D KDs though? No, I don't think there's an S&D KD stat line on max stats, which
They're
is
looking better though, for sure.
unfortunate.
I mean, I think that the Gorillas are shaping up to be a reasonable team. You know, at the beginning of the
Oh
season,
yeah,
we said absolutely not, but
it's going to be interesting to see, though, if they keep this up or if they're unable to keep this up, since they did play a decent number of search and destroys. I imagine teams are going to be picking up on what they do on the map,
true.
since they had put in a lot of work into that and it showed. I think the biggest standout for me in search and destroy was how absolutely irritating Vivid was on the map. The man was literally a ghost. He would kill someone, vanish. And he did that so often. He was getting these kills and just being able to get out of dodge, just scurry away and stay alive so often. When I was watching that, the Gorillas play search and destroy against teams, I literally felt so bad for the other team. And it was a feeling that I had felt when I had watched kind of the S&D woes of Optic in past seasons,
True.
where a player, there's just like an aggravating player on the map that they don't know how to deal with. And that's kind of what Vivid felt like for against all the teams this week. And he was just that aggravating player that was getting these kills. And you didn't know, like, you just playing these weird angles, I guess. And so it's going to be interesting to see if they're able to keep that up or if they keep on switching things up to keep things interesting and teams on the edge going forward, which, I mean, I'm not going to complain about. I still hate their logo. Not a big fan of any of their players, really. But,
Right.
I mean, if they want to throw a wrench into the CDL and screw some teams over and make it into that 8th place spot so they don't start in losers bracket, go for it.
Yeah, we'll see. I could see them, you know, getting to a top 8 spot. I don't think that's unrealistic at this point, but we'll see. That's
Well, who do they have to be above to get to top 8? That is the question, because right now the teams that are around their points, it's Seattle, Toronto, Paris, and New York, I believe. I think those are the only teams that are around their point range, and then just above them you have London and Optic.
I think if Optic doesn't get their stuff figured out, New York, I'm pretty convinced at this point. New York has what
I
it
mean,
takes to be a top 8 team.
Optics looks has looked good at the past 2 events they've been at, as has New York. So
I
I have
think,
some faith in those teams.
yeah,
And so
I,
it's going to
I think you're
be,
right.
I guess, to be ahead, New York is going to have to beat out Seattle, Toronto, and Paris, but they need to beat out one more team. So it's got to be either New York or Optic that they,
Or London, which I don't
or
see.
London that they beat out. Yeah, but I don't see that happening with the how good London looked at the other event. But I mean, they looked really good at that event. But then I mean, you saw Chicago at this event; they didn't look that good. So maybe you see something similar with the London roster. Who knows?
Yeah, we will see for sure. At this point, I mean, it's kind of silly that we even do predictions at this point because I mean,
Yeah, I'm just gonna maybe for one of these events, maybe not this one, but maybe the last one, we'll just throw darts at a board. Or you know what? We should have our predictions and then we should have a coin flip. And
coin
then
flip predictions.
we can compare at the end of the season who has the more predictions correct. Me, you, or the coin flip. At that I think that's how we'll do it. So we'll start at not this event because I have coins right next to me, but I
No,
don't feel
we'll
like
do it
doing it
next
right.
event.
We'll
We'll do
do
it
it
next
next.
event.
Yeah,
We'll
we'll
do
do it
if we
next
remember,
event.
we'll do it
But
next event.
yeah, I'll remember. I got this.
All right,
But we'll move on since we are kind of dragging this out. We have been talking about a lot of, I think, good talking points to be
for
bringing
sure.
up. But the next match was Atlanta FaZe versus Dallas Empire. Dallas went up 2-0 against Atlanta FaZe, just as Seattle did. However, this time there wasn't a long break. Atlanta FaZe bring it back and were able to beat the Dallas Empire 3-2 in the end. The S&D and the domination that FaZe won weren't close at all. The hard point that they did win over the Dallas Empire was pretty close. That was a 250 to 212. The maps that the Empire took over the Atlanta FaZe, they were pretty darn convincing in Dallas Empire's favor. It was a 6-3 S&D, and then it was a 250 to 139 hard point. So the only map that was really close between these two teams, I would say, is that St. Petrograd hard point game 4. But like I was looking at this, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm right. Dallas best team right now. They are better than Atlanta, and even though they lost, like I don't think that like Dallas is still in that tier
Yeah,
definitively. Like there's no doubt in my mind Dallas and Atlanta they're still in that same tier. And even still, it's hard to say that for me it's somewhat hard to say that Atlanta, okay, they just beat Dallas, they're better than Dallas. So they're above Dallas in that S tier, but for me I'm still going to consider Dallas as the number 1 S tier over Atlanta still even after this loss simply because of
I don't
the
know.
other performances that Empire put up throughout this weekend.
I can't. I still can't agree with that. I really can't because, you know, both of them got beat by Florida in the semis and finals, and Dallas did better against Florida. But even then, I think they're kind of at equal footing. I think you're right. I mean, it's pretty hard to argue that Atlanta and Dallas aren't the top 2 teams in the league at this point. But it's a little harder to argue that there's one better than the other. I think they're both. Those two are the only two that I feel like have consistently performed the entire season, and they will be the top 2 teams to beat moving forward. Everybody else,
So you think there's no like 1-2 in the S tier? You saying there's just Dallas and FaZe
no,
pretty much?
I'm still a more firm believer that it's just Dallas and FaZe, and both of them are kind of evenly matched at this point.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. There is no 1 and 2. It's just Dallas and FaZe.
Okay, I think that if Florida keeps this up, which I it doesn't even matter at this point. Predictions are just shot. Like I could say Florida wins every other event or every event from now on, and even if they don't play, and probably be more right with my bias than I would with trying to go on stats and data analysis or anything like that. I mean, it's just a crapshoot at this point.
Yeah, I mean, after we saw a roster change with Florida, they performed extremely well. Events after that, they didn't do well. This event, they had a roster change going into it. They performed very well. We'll see if they're able to keep that up since I do believe they are going to be at the Paris event. I'm going to check that right now.
Yes,
Yes, they are at the Paris event.
yes, they
And
they are.
okay. So they are at the Paris event. So we will get to see another look at this Florida roster. So if they win this one, yeah, I'm going to put them in that S tier. If they don't win this one, they're going to stay in that A tier. If they do really bad at this one, might move to B tier. So
True.
this is definitely going to be an important one, at least for me, in terms of how Florida performs. But going to be moving on to our match 7, which was Chicago Huntsmen versus Toronto Ultra. Chicago Huntsmen took this really close for Mazda hardpoint. That's one of Toronto's favored kind of hardpoint maps. That was a 250 to a 245 in favor of Chicago. And then they took the rest of the maps pretty darn convincingly. S&D or Mazda, they took that 6-2. And then Gunrunner Domination, they took that 167 to 130. Talked about Toronto enough. Talked about Chicago Huntsmen, decent amount, I would say. And so going to move on to our next matchup,
Okay.
which was the Minnesota Rocker versus Seattle Surge. Minnesota Rocker, they go up 2-0 against Seattle Surge. However, what have we learned about going up 2-0 against teams this weekend? It's not the thing you want to do. So Seattle come back. They take that reverse sweep over the Minnesota Rocker. The hard point that they played first, it was pretty close. That was a 0 hard point. That was a 250 to a 117. Arklov S&D went handedly in favor of Rocker, 6-2. Gunrunner Domination was pretty darn close, a 165 to a 155 in favor of the Surge. And then after that, Surge just kind of ran away with it. Hackney Hardpoint, 250 to a 128, and St. Petrograd S&D, 6-2. So
Yeah,
St.
that was
Petrograd S&D, even though the Surge has been pretty darn
terrible.
abysmal in
Terrible.
search. Yes, they have been abysmal, terrible in
Terrible.
search. St. Petrograd, they're 4-4 on. So that's one of their better search maps. Definitely. It's definitely one of their better search maps.
Well, I think Petro really rewards a strong AR player or a strong player that can play a mid lane, and I look no further than the turret himself, Octane. So yeah,
Do you think Arklov Peak or any of these other maps kind of fit that?
I think Arklov has gone in way more in a Black Ops 4 direction than any so far because there's been so many different ways you can play Arklov search. I mean, the slow route even is to rush B around the church side, and that's still really fast. Like it's no longer is it the time where it's a big shootout on A and you're playing for picks or whatever. Teams are a lot more a lot faster on that. But Petro is still kind of that slower area, especially in the mid, where if you challenge somebody for too long, they're gonna get you. And Octane's one of those players that he will punish you if you challenge mid lane. So I think that it favors teams like Seattle Surge who have a strong AR player to play maps like that. That being said, Seattle has made a lot of changes to get to where they're at with Surge. Honestly, GG Seattle. This was a step in the right direction. Minnesota is one of those teams that it should feel good to beat because Minnesota's been one of those consistently good teams throughout the season. And
Yeah, I mean they're top 5 in terms of CDL points. They're fifth overall in CDL points exactly, and they're the only team that hasn't won an event that's in the top 5,
right,
which says something about kind of the consistency that they have had. And so this drop off, which has been a consistent drop off in their performances, is extremely concerning, especially now that one of their better players, one of their better SMG players, that's kind of like that flex guy in Alex, is out. He did not play in the Seattle Surge series, which might have had a bit of an effect on the outcome of it due to an injury with his thumb. I'm not sure on kind of the extent of it. However, yes, okay, anyone that's maybe like a super jock and kind of a jerk can be like, haha, he hurt his thumb. But I mean,
no,
that's
that's
what you're using. So this is like if you broke your leg in the NFL or something. So
right,
it's a pretty
exactly.
serious injury for someone that is a professional Call of Duty player. And so it's definitely not a laughing matter. It can have a potentially drastic effect on his career. And so we did see Exceed come in for this team, and he did do kind of what he needed to do. He did put up a decent performance, given that he probably didn't have relatively any practice with this roster.
Yeah,
But
true.
I think that definitely affected the outcome of this series in the end.
I agree with that. I think that it's unfortunate that it happened to Alex, and I'm hoping for a nice quick recovery on his behalf. But I mean, that's the kind of things that just happen. I mean, you get injuries occasionally, and they could be mid game like this one was, and you got to be ready, and you got to have your subs in ready to play. I think that he'll make a good recovery though. And I don't know the extent of the injury, but I'm assuming that if it was happening mid series, it's probably nothing too
I think
serious.
he came out before he played in the Seattle Surge series.
Oh, I couldn't
Yep.
tell you that. I thought he played mid or he subbed out. Maybe it was he subbed
Looking
out
looking
mid series.
look, I don't think he did, just based on looking on his stats. He had 78 deaths. Exceed had 94 deaths. So that to me is saying that Alex
Oh yeah,
probably didn't play that, and his KD definitely reflected his injury at this event. He was at a .58, which the worst KD we've seen at an event, I believe, was Happy, and I think even Happy was above that. I'm gonna actually go back and check really quick if you want to make a point, add to anything. Yeah,
uh,
Happy
yeah,
was at a .68. That's the worst KD we've
jeez,
seen at any event. And Alex's performance, due to an injury, obviously, was worse than that, which I think, yeah,
yeah.
you
I
can
think that
speak to the severity of it.
I think that's unfortunate, and like I said, hopefully he makes a quick return to the league and everything like that. I don't believe they play next week, so they'll give a little bit of time for him to recover. It is unfortunate they had to bow out like this, but it is nice to see Seattle have some success in beating a team that's not the LA Gorillas. You know,
Yeah,
they
it's their first win against a non-LA Gorillas team.
and maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel for Seattle, but I honestly I'm not gonna get my hopes up too much.
I'm not either. I don't think so. This is kind of a last-ditch effort roster, which they have to make work because they don't have any other options available to them.
Right.
So I think having that mindset where this is what we're stuck with, this is what we have to
True.
use. I think that will benefit the Surge since they're not looking at other options. They know that this is their only option, and so I think there's a lot of a rapid improvement that they can make as a result of that. However, with how good the other teams in this league are, I just don't realistically see this roster being able to move out of the kind of bottom four in the CDL.
Yeah, I mean like Octane would have to, you know, play out of his mind the entire COD champs for them to do anything relevant.
You need a Octane and Apathy to kind of really show up, and then you need Slacked to probably go even, and then Proto and Pander to go slightly below even if they want to kind of have a chance. Obviously, you want everyone to be above even,
Right.
but that's like realistic. I'm
And
being realistic
yeah,
here. I
and
like the two players that I think can put up a positive performance are Apathy and Octane.
I agree. I mean, those are your stars, and those are the guys that you should be leaning on.
Yeah. Moving on to our next series, it was the Chicago Huntsmen versus the LA Gorillas. And Chicago Huntsmen, they lost this to the Gorillas. They lost to the Gorillas 3-2. Gorillas took both S&Ds. First one, our club, they took extremely convincingly. That was a 6-1. Then the Gunrunner S&D, they took 6-4. And then they were able to sneak out the game four Hackney Hardpoint 250 to 243. And Hackney Hardpoint is an awful map. And I'm not saying that because Chicago lost. I'm not saying that because Atlanta FaZe lost it as well to the LA Gorillas. I'm saying that because on P2, you literally need to outslay the opposing team 8 kills to 2 if you want to break the hard point, which is absurd. It doesn't like that is absolutely asinine for a hill. You shouldn't need to. You can have 5 dead and still not break the hill because of the way that they have the spawn set up.
Yeah,
And
spawns
I
are
don't want to talk
tragic.
on spawns because I've feel like we dug into that last episode, but
We've done it
it
every
is
episode.
awful. Just like if you're a spectator, just watch P2 Hackney. Just watch the spawns. It is abysmal. It is absolutely abysmal that you have players just absolutely slaying out the other team, trying to break into this P2 hill, and they spawn them right on it. Like it's so absurdly stupid how they have it set up. But yeah, that's probably not one of the reasons that Chicago lost the series. But I mean, like props to the Gorillas. I do want to say that, but it's incredibly frustrating watching some of the BS that does happen in the hard points on that map.
Yeah,
Um,
I
as soon
mean,
as this
just in
went to a
general,
game,
but
just in general. But as soon as this went to a game 5, I'm like, yep, see you later, Chicago. You're not taking this one. Sorry. So yeah, Chicago definitely probably needs to look at their S&D a bit. Definitely take some notes from the Gorillas since they were an incredibly annoying team to play against. And the search is just by watching them, I felt annoyed. Even I wasn't even playing against them. I felt annoyed. So, but yeah, Gorillas get 20 points and they move on to the semifinals to face Atlanta FaZe. But before we touch on our semifinals, our last matchup was Dallas Empire versus Seattle Surge, and Dallas Empire 3-0 Seattle Surge, as they have been doing pretty much the majority of the season. And the closest match was the Search and Destroy.
right,
So do I think it's going to be the closest match the next time they play? No, I don't.
right.
But it was this time around, and so props to Seattle for that. Yeah, that closes out the group stage matches, and so we're going to advance to our semifinals, which were a couple of
Sunday.
bangers.
Oh my
Our
God,
Sunday
I
matches.
was
They were
so happy.
both
I was so
game
hyped.
5s, as kind of have been. I feel the semifinals have honestly been way more interesting than the finals for kind of the majority of the home series. But our first semifinal matchup, we saw the Atlanta FaZe versus the LA Gorillas, and the Atlanta FaZe, they lost the Gunrunner hard point, 239 to 250 against the Gorillas. The Gorillas started off hot, and they're taking the first hard point. You're looking at it like, oh, geez, they've been looking really good at search. However, they went up against the best search team in the game. And when you have a relatively unstoppable force against an immovable object, the immovable object beats the relatively unstoppable force. And
Yeah,
unfortunately for Gorillas, that wall was the Atlanta FaZe. They took both of the search and destroys, and then it would have been very surprising if this LA Gorillas squad took all 3 respawns off of the Atlanta FaZe, simply kind of looking at their team. However, this weekend with how bad Priester was performing, it wasn't out of question, but the Atlanta FaZe was able to clutch up on that Hackney hard point that they did play against the Gorillas, and that was one where it's like P2. That was the one where I saw that they were slaying. Atlanta FaZe was out slaying the Gorillas so heavily, moving into that rotation, but took them like a good 40 seconds to actually finally beat them out of the hill and out of the spawns. But by then, it's just like, all right, take those last 20 seconds. We got 40 off it. We're going to the next hill. So, talking about that enough.
right.
Good job to Gorillas. Was really close to Piccadilly S&D. Gorillas almost could have won this 3-0 if they had taken that Piccadilly search. That went to a round 11. And
That
I
was a
do
tight
like
one.
that they have a cool graphic now for round 11 in game 5s. That was really cool that they added that. Props to the production crew there. But once again, another home series that Atlanta is at, another finals they do make. And so
Well, this was an incredibly close series too. Like,
all of
I,
Atlanta's were
yeah,
incredibly
that
close.
was
This was
insanity.
the only time they didn't go to game 5 was the finals. So,
Well, the thing
and
is that
this was the first one they didn't have to reverse sweep too.
no,
So
this one in round 11, it was a 1v2 with Celium against oh gosh. I can't even think of the players right now. But Celium picks one off bomb as they were mid plant and just absolutely zooted his way out of there. And it was like unbelievable. Oh no, that was the Atlanta series. Never
that
mind.
was the
Or
Atlanta series.
sorry,
Yep.
Atlanta Seattle series.
Yeah, Atlanta
Um
Seattle.
yeah,
Because Slack
gosh.
planted the bomb
Yes.
at 0 seconds
0 seconds.
left. Like it was at 0.00 seconds left, and I believe bomb got planted, but because the timer was at 0 or
0.
something.
Yeah, it was game over.
There's some weird things with the timers in this game, and I realized this because I went through hardpoint, search, and dom second by second to make a graphic that I know you probably saw since you follow me on Twitter.
Right.
But to make those graphics and all that, I literally made a small adjustment in the background code on YouTube to enable myself to go through the video 1 second at a time. And when hardpoints switch, there's like a second when neither hardpoint is active. Like
Which
the
is
old one
ridiculous.
just deactivated and the new one is activated. And there's like a weird second in between there. That's not even like a full second. It's like an eighth of a second or something. Because I noticed this because I was going second by second, but as I was going second by second, the like game timer was messing, or not the game timer because I wasn't going by that. I was going by the hard point timer because the game clock obviously it only runs when no one's in the hard point or the hard point's contested. There were weird points where I was getting in between like a full second, and
Right.
so there's some very like weird intervals with that. And there were some points where you were clocking in 2 points off of 1 second on a hill, which is why like if you only need like 1 second to win it and you don't think you're like on the edge of maybe winning or not on a hill by like getting all of the time on it, I am more so in the field of staying in that hill just in case. It's like one of those scenarios where like you get into the hill, maybe like you get into the hill just as a second is occurring, so that you get like you only need to be in the hill for like a tenth of a second, and because like the time shifted in that tenth of a second, you get that point. Because I don't think it's like you have to be in the hill for a second. I I
No,
would have to
it
look at it more closely, but I think it's based on the time that a second occurs that the hill is active.
yeah,
And
it's based on like the very first frame that the hill is active. So each second can be a point, but who like it checks the game state in the very first frame of the second. So
yeah,
once the hill becomes active, whatever the state is of that hill, you will immediately. So if you get picked right as the hill becomes active, but you were in a hill when the hill became active, you get the point.
yeah.
Even though the
So
hill went with neutral right off the rip, it,
yeah,
you still would get a single point. So you don't
yeah.
have to
So
hold it for a second. You just have to be in there for the second that it
yeah.
was
Yeah, so
available.
that's why I think like we see some of these points where it's like, oh, are they going to get it? And then they do end up getting it. But that was one thing I noticed when I was kind of going through that film. But what were you even talking about? Did we move on to the Florida versus Dallas series yet?
We can now.
All right, we're gonna move on to that since I don't remember what we were talking about after that very long and extended tangent. The Dallas Empire went up against the Florida Mutineers. Dallas lost this in an incredibly close round 11, game 5 on Ramazda S&D. This is probably the team that took Florida, I think, the farthest on Ramazda. I don't know how many Ramazdas Florida played. I think they only played one against Chicago and then one against the Empire. But that was one, went all the way to round 11. However, Florida took it in the end. They took both of the hard points off of the Dallas Empire in pretty darn convincing fashion. Dallas smashed them on the Gunrunner S&D, and then they also did pretty darn well on the Gunrunner Domination. That was a 161 to a 129. First three maps, it was Gunrunner, and then the last two were Mazda. So I think Dallas was hoping they would take that 3-0 sweep on the Gunrunners and close out the series. However, Florida was able to hold strong on that first Gunrunner hardpoint and then extend the series to that game 4. Then they took that one, so it made it to game 5, and they ended up taking that in the end. Off the back, Florida would not have won that if it was not for Farrow. Holy cow! I'm just remembering now that Ramasa S&D, he went
He went
full
off.
God sent mode. He
He
was,
was
what did he go? He
amazing.
was like 12-5 or something in that one.
He was OP.
I'm gonna shimmy the scroll bar right over to those stats for that, because holy moly, he 16-4
16
is
and
what
4. Yeah.
Farrow went. He had a 4.0 KD, dude. Like what can you do at that point? He's just carrying you all the way across the finish line. My gosh, yeah, yeah. So
To,
Dallas would have taken that if it was not for Pharaoh. That's
to
all I
think
gotta say.
that Pharaoh in the beginning of the season was blacklisted is still insane in my eyes. Like nobody wanted to pick up Pharaoh, and now look at him. He's one of the stars of the CDL. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
what do you do at that point?
I wouldn't say shining stars, but he's definitely been an impactful player for this Mutineers squad.
I mean, he's been an integral cog for a team that has 2 finals wins. So
Yeah.
I don't know what you consider stars at this point, but
I mean, he's not like a player that everyone's talking about. That's what I mean. But he's
true.
definitely, obviously, deserved to be in the league, and he's definitely been an integral part of this team. I just like saying shining stars. When I think shining stars, I'm like my mind's immediately skipping to like kind of all the players that are like in that top 5 discussion of the CDL. But for the Mutineers, especially in that game 5,
Lights out.
that boy was the fudging sun.
Lights out. Absolutely.
Boy was the freaking Milky Way, bro. But yeah, so Mutineers beat Dallas Empire, move on to the finals, and they take a pretty darn convincing series over the Atlanta FaZe. They take the Gunrunner Hardpoint 250 to 146. They lose the Arklov S&D. That's going to go to FaZe. That was a 6-1 to FaZe. Best S&D team. The second best S&D team there was probably the Gorillas, even though their like round total might not show it throughout the season. But at this event, the Gorillas were definitely the second best S&D team at this event. Atlanta
True.
FaZe #1. But Mutineers, they were just very dominant in respawns this game, or not this game. Excuse me,
This
this
event.
event. That the St. Petrograd domination. They took that 177 to 123, and that was an extreme blowout in terms of slaying. I think that was one of the biggest kill deficits we have seen, at least at this event, if not the entire season. And then the Hackney Hardpoint was a bit closer, but once again, that went to the Mutineers. That was a 250 to a 231. So Atlanta FaZe, I think, has a bit of work to do on the respawns. We've talked about that, so I'm not going to go more kind of in depth into that. I'm pretty sure once new Hardpoints podcast comes out, we're going to be hearing Crowder saying a lot of similar things on the topic of Atlanta FaZe's respawns. And Florida, they've been looking pretty good in this event at the respawns. I believe going to go to their domination. I believe they went, yeah, so they were 3-1 in Dom on this weekend. The only team they lost to was Dallas. They were 3-3 in their searches, and then, as we said earlier, they were 6-2 in hard points. The only hard points they lost were to the Chicago Huntsmen, which were both pretty close. They at least breached the 200-point mark in both of those hard points, which can't be said for the majority of the teams that they faced in hardpoint this weekend. 4 of the teams, or not 4 of the 8 matches in hardpoint they played this weekend. So 4 out of the 6 that they won, the opposing team was unable to breach the 200-point mark, which in this game is pretty big. A lot of people are saying that if you lose by, say, 50 points, or if you lose by like 75 points, that pretty much counts as being a 100-point clubbed in some of the other titles. So
Yeah. It's
that's
it's pretty damning at this point.
yeah.
Finals?
Yeah, wasn't we just that was just the finals we
Oh,
discussed. That was Florida for versus Atlanta.
yeah, they smoked them.
Yeah.
Easy clap.
So congratulations to Florida. They got their second home stand win. So now both Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago, and Florida have won a homestand. They are the only teams to have won a homestand. So be very interesting to see if we're able to get a 5th team in the mix there. Maybe Minnesota, who's currently in 5th place in terms of CDL points, or if it's going to be a different team, or if those are just going to be all the teams competing for the last 4 homestand titles. At the end of the season, we could just see Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago, and Florida each with 3 homestand titles, which would be pretty crazy to see at the end, and it would have you kind of have a massive point disparity between the top 4 and kind of everyone else if that is something that does occur.
True. I'm curious to see how the rest of the league plays out because at this point it's a crapshoot. It really does feel like a crapshoot.
Yeah, it really does. It feels kind of like maybe the top 4 is starting to settle in with this the second Florida homestand victory. However, it's going to be hard to kind of say that yet, simply because I'm from now on giving teams kind of that 3 homestand event eye test to see if they're able to keep up that kind of consistent performance throughout 3 events, or if it was just a one-time thing, as we have seen from a couple of these teams. We saw that from Florida when they first made a roster change, bringing in, well, not the first time we saw them, but the second time we saw Florida bringing in Farrell for Pristini, and they kind of fell off. And then now we saw Florida kind of pick it up, and so be interesting to see if they fall off again. And then we saw that for Chicago, they brought in Pristini for Gunless, and they won an event, and then this event they got out in 5th, 6th. So it's going to be very interesting to see kind of how it progresses, and that's something that we've kind of been saying a lot. But I truly do believe that stand where it's very difficult to kind of say anything about these teams because the league is so competitive and so close. But maybe we're starting to see some disparity in the top 4. Then you kind of have your middle of the pack with Minnesota, Optic, London, New York probably is in that mix, I would say, as well, since they've been putting up better performances than I think their placement gives them. And then maybe you see some kind of start to show some disparity in the top 4 or bottom 4, where you have Seattle, Toronto, Paris, and then the Grills. Or if the Grills keeps on playing how they did this past weekend, then they're probably going to potentially be in contention with New York, Optic, and London, potentially, but those teams are pretty solid respawn teams, I would say. And so I'm not giving Gorillas kind of the benefit of the doubt here over them. However, potentially over New York, I will, because New York is the second worst S&D team in the game. And they're
True.
at a 43% S&D round win percentage right now, which is only 0.5% better than Seattle. So they're getting very close to being the worst S&D team in the game, and the Gorillas are the 3rd best. They're at a 74 round win percentage. What did I say? 54.74 round win percentage overall in the league. So, yeah, that's probably the only team kind of there in the middle of the pack that I just said, being Minnesota, Optic, New York, and London, that I'd probably give Girls the benefit over is being that New York team. But with all that said, we're going to move on to give our Paris homestand predictions. And I see you already have it completely filled out, probably while I was rambling there. So I'm going to do a little bit of catch up here. But our Group A matchup first that we have written down, probably not the first on the weekend because I never have that ordering right, is going to be London versus Dallas. I'm going to give this to Dallas as well. I'm going to say it's probably going to be a 3-1 for Dallas. I saw you giving Dallas a 3-2 win over London. Dallas has just looked really, really good. It could definitely be a 3-2. It could definitely be a 3-1. I think we both agree that Dallas probably should end up taking this in the end. However, with
For
how
sure.
these weekends have gone, who the heck knows?
Yep. I
But
agree.
even though I'm saying it's a 3-1, I think probably these hard points, these DOMs, and the search and destroys are all going to be going the distance. It's going to be probably 20-point hard point games, 10-point domination games, and then the searches are probably going to be going either round 10 or round 11 in most of the cases.
Yeah, I think just in general, the parity and the equity of the league at this point has never been, more across the board. So I think at any given moment, any team can beat any team, and I mean I wouldn't even be surprised if London beat Dallas at this point. I think it's just how it
Yeah,
goes.
that one's in a bit the realm of possibility. The last time we saw these teams face off, I believe it was a reverse sweep for the Dallas Empire over London, and that was
I think
at the
so.
London homestand, I do believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the last time we saw these teams face off. However, I mean, we saw the 12th seed team face Atlanta last weekend, and that went all the way to Game 5, round 11. So yeah, who knows at this point, honestly. Moving on to our second Group A matchup, this will be the last match of Friday night since it does have the homestand team in it, being the Paris Legion. And they're going to face off against Florida. I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say a 3-1 for Florida over Paris. This being Paris's homestand event, on top of also Florida looking pretty good. I don't see Paris making it out of their group or winning any matchups in their group for that matter. So yeah, I'm gonna say Florida 3-1.
Yeah. I just think that yes, hasn't been doing that great, and Florida is coming off of the finals. It just feels good to give that to Florida.
Moving on to our first Group B matchup, it's going to be the New York Subliners versus Optic Gaming LA. I've said the past 2 times that New York and Optic have been in the same tournament. However, they've not played each other. I've been saying that New York has been looking like the better team than Optic simply
Yes.
from the matches that they have played. And so I'm going to stick with what I have been saying. So I'm not a hypocrite. I'm going to go New York over Optic 3-2. I probably shouldn't be saying 3-2 though, since as I literally just discussed, New York
Is
is
one of the
the
worst search teams.
second worst search team. So I'm going to say 3-1. If it goes to a game 5, I have very little faith that New York is going to be able to take this Optic Gaming team, especially since the last time we did see OGLA in Search and Destroy, TJ and Dashy kind of wreaked havoc across the map, and Slasher has been incredibly scary in Search and Destroy, clutching up for his team on numerous occasions.
True.
So I think New York's probably going to need to take this 3-1. Otherwise, Optic Gaming is going to take it in the end. So they're going to need to take the respawns or maybe sneak out that first Search and Destroy if it's their pick.
This game could go literally either way, though. I mean,
yeah, this is probably out of the first 4 matches that we have going to be the closest, and I say that with a grain of salt because we're almost never right, at least as of recently. I mean, we were pretty darn good in our predictions for that Seattle homestand, but this past one,
yeah, no,
this Minnesota one, no, we were not. So
that was bad.
maybe this is the one that we're going to be good at again. It seems like we have a really bad prediction one, and then we kind of get everything back into the flow of getting them right. But moving on to our second Group B match, it's going to be Atlanta versus Toronto. I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say 3-1. Don't know which map Toronto's going to take. I think they're just going to take one just to be safe. Doesn't really matter. In the end, I think Atlanta's going to take this pretty handedly over the Toronto Ultra. I do believe Classic is out. Kleenex is in. Kleenex was pretty disgusting at BO4 champs. However, we haven't really seen him since. So don't really know how good he's going to be in this title. And the last time we saw Atlanta put up a really poor performance at an event, they came back with a vengeance and they won the next one. So that could potentially be what we see here. And so for that reason, I'm going to say Atlanta over Toronto.
I think that this game Atlanta beats Toronto, but I don't think that Atlanta's going to come back with a vengeance. I really do feel like Atlanta's probably starting to get a little bit of burnout, and it's time for them to, get that well-earned break. They're coming into another weekend of Call of Duty immediately after, playing last week. So this is going to heavily favor teams like New York and Optic since they did not play, and Paris and London, sorry. Those 4 teams have not played in the last event. So I think that we're going to see some sparks fly, and I don't think that Atlanta will make the finals this time.
Okay. Well, we'll get to who you think Atlanta is going to lose to in the end. And yeah, with only a week break in between the previous homestand and this one, it does give teams a lot less time to kind of fix some of the issues that they did have. And Atlanta seemed to have quite a bit of issues in that last homestand in the respawn. So, yep, definitely could have some troubles with some of these better teams in their bracket. They do have New York and OGLA who have been looking like pretty tough teams as of late. So yeah, it's definitely not outside the realm of possibility. However, talking on our Group A winners round one matchup, it's going to be Dallas versus Florida. This time around, I think Dallas is going to take it over Florida. I'm going to agree with you 3-2. Last time they played, it was incredibly close. I think Dallas is one of those teams that they didn't have a lot of errors or issues in their gameplay, so they're
No.
not going to have as much to improve on. And I think with the small adjustments that they are going to be able to make, I think they'll be able to take this rematch against Florida in the end, as well as kind of Florida not being as big of an unknown as they were at the last event, kind of speaking a bit on that second factor that I think comes into the honeymoon effect of why some teams perform better after a roster change.
True.
Moving on to our Group B winners round one, I have New York versus Atlanta. You do as well. You have New York taking it over Atlanta 3-1. And
Yep.
so I'm going to say that Atlanta takes this 3-2 over New York. I know New York is looking like an incredibly good respawn team. However, their one struggle in respawn has been their domination. Still, they have been looking better in the game mode. However, if we go to their domination record, they're 5-13 in that game mode. They have never played St. Petrograd Dom. They have a 4-6 record on Hackney and a 1-7 record on Gunrunner. And Hackney domination has looked like one of Atlanta's better domination maps. They
Yeah,
have an
I'd say it's
eight and
better.
three. They have an 8-3 record on that. They have a 4-2 record on Petro and a 3-1 record on Gunrunner. So the only scenario that I could see here where New York's able to take 2 hard points off of the Atlanta FaZe roster and then able to take the Dom is if something happens, and I'm pretty much guaranteeing New York is banning St. Petrograd. And so
Right.
this all comes down to if New York has finally gotten a second Dom map, or if Atlanta is going to do somewhat of an ego chow, quote unquote ego chow, into the New York subliners and play them on Hackney. I say somewhat because Atlanta also has a damn good record on that map.
Yeah, what I'm saying here though is that, and hear me out. New York has nothing to lose and everything to gain at this point, and I'd imagine that if there's any event that they need to win and secure, it's gonna be this one. So I think that they're gonna get, if they get this win against Atlanta right here in the winners round one, then they go on to make a deep run in the finals because at that point they have so much momentum behind them. They just beat Atlanta. They just beat Optic, and who's next after that? Dallas. So, will they be playing
They'd be
Florida
playing Florida
or
or Dallas, whichever
Dallas?
team. They'd be playing Florida, or I guess Florida or London, whoever's coming out of your group. Probably not
Yeah.
Paris is coming out of your group, but they'd be
No.
playing one of those two teams
Yeah, true.
in your scenario, and potentially my scenario as well as we go through our predictions. But
Yeah, I think that's in the strictest sense, New York definitely needs to win this. This is one of those events that like New York absolutely must win in order to solidify a spot out of their dingy 9 through 12.
well, where are they trying to make a run for is, I guess, kind of the question. New York's at what, 50 CDL points currently, and that puts them, I believe, in ninth. And obviously, they want to move up the standings. I'm actually going to bring up the CDL points kind of right now. But ideally, what's like the highest spot they can get at this point? I mean, you're going to have Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, and Florida. They're probably all around, I'd say, 150 points. And the most New York can get at any of these events is going to be 50. And
Yeah, I mean, realistically,
these top teams in Florida, Chicago, Dallas, and Atlanta, they're not going to be bowing out without getting at least 10 points. So they're still going to be earning some.
they're not
And
going to
I
get a
have it.
top spot. You're not wrong. But
Yeah.
if they
So
can
New York is at 60 points. New York is at 60 points currently.
if they get 50 here, That means, and that would be them winning the event. That solidifies them in a top 8 spot, and they can kind of focus on champs and making small improvements to get better.
It potentially solidifies them in a top 8 spot based on kind of I believe, I don't know which stat person was. I believe it was the stat person from the LA Gorillas who has a PhD in statistics, so relatively trustworthy source.
Yeah, probably a smart dude.
who said in order to get top 8 you have to have 110 CDL points by the end of the season. So if they do get 50, yes, I would put them at 110. However, they're already in ninth right now, so they'd only be moving up one spot by the end of the season. Obviously, if they won the event, they'd move up to sixth in the standings, which is a lot better. Sixth, that's going to be a higher spot in the bracket. But yeah, it's definitely going to be difficult for them to kind of get to a spot that they really want to be at, I would say. I mean, obviously you want to be top 8. That's the kind of the first checkpoint that you want. After you've solidified a top 8, then your next checkpoint is a top 6. But realistically, none of the teams that are in the 6th place spot or below, I think are going to be able to get top 4. Right now, the top 4 teams, it's Atlanta at 200 points, Chicago at 190, Dallas at 170, Florida at 150, and then 5th is Minnesota Rocker at 120. And then in 6th place with the London Royal Ravens, they're at 80 points. So that's a 40-point gap between 5th and 6th, and that doesn't even get you into top 4.
True.
To get into top 4, which the London Royal Ravens would need 70 points, which is a lot of points. So
yeah, I mean it's 2 events
none
max
of
or
these
minimum.
none of these teams in the top below top or none of these teams below the Minnesota Rocker, in my eyes, are going to be getting top 4. So like their checkpoint, New York, yes, it's going to be that 8th place spot, so they don't have to start in the loose bracket. But realistically, I don't see them by the end of the season getting into the top 6 unless they have some stellar events from here on out. Because there's 2 teams ahead of them in Optic and London that are looking pretty scary.
I don't know if I'd call Optic scary at this point. I think they've had some good turnouts, but they've been inconsistent at best. New York has been progressively better over the CDL period, and I think that this is going to be the make or break event for them. So
Yeah,
I'm going to say they make it here.
New York has looked good. It's just that the thing with Dom of only having one decent Dom map, not even good, decent, because they're only 4 and 6 in it, and then how bad they have been in S&D, it's just very difficult for me to, as much as I have praised them as being the second best team over this OGLA squad out of the events that they have both have been at, it's very difficult for me to say that they're going to win an event at this point. But they could definitely surprise us. We haven't seen them for an event or two events, I think, maybe. No, one event. We just only didn't see them at Minnesota. So we haven't seen them for about a month at this point, because there was 3 weeks between the Seattle and the Minnesota event, and then there's been a week between the Minnesota event and this one. So we haven't seen them for a month, and a lot can happen in a month, as we know.
Yep.
So, but as of right now, knowing what I've seen from them, I'm not going to give them the win over Atlanta at this point. Could
All right.
definitely happen though. So
I think
that's my argument. With that, we'll move on to our Group A losers round 1, London versus Paris. I'm giving it to London, 3-1 over Paris. You're saying 3-2 over Paris. I'm saying 3-1 simply because it's Paris's homestand, and I'm sticking with the trend of the home team at their homestand getting absolutely smacked. So that's why I'm good. I'm standing by it.
That's fair.
All right. With that said, since we both agree and there's not much else to say, we'll move on to our Group B losers round 1, which is going to be OG versus Toronto. I'm also going to give that to OG. I'm going to say that's going to be a 3-1. You have a 3-0. I could agree. I could agree with a 3-0. There's not really any reason to say a 3-1 because our predictions were saying if we're right or wrong, not
Right.
going by map count, but for the sake of whatever, for the sake of not saying that Toronto's absolute garbage right now, because I don't believe they're absolute garbage, but for this series, I'm gonna go with the Optic Gaming LA squad. Group A loses round 2. You have Florida versus London. I am going to have Florida versus London as well. And I'm going to give this to London.
All right.
I'm giving it to London 3-2 over Florida. I think London will take both searches. They've looked pretty darn good in search and destroy. At the last event they were at, they went 5-1 in search and destroy. And they're definitely not a team to sneeze at in the respawns. They took Chicago in some incredibly close respawns. They almost beat them in the Hackney Dom, which if they had won that, the series would have gone to game 5. And as I said, I think I would have favored London in the game 5 in that matchup. And as we know, Chicago was the only team to beat Florida in respawns at the prior event. So for that reason, I think London's going to be able to take at least one of the 3 respawns, either a Dom or a hard point off of this Florida lineup. And then I think they're going to take both search and destroy. So I'm going to give it to London 3-2 over this Florida lineup.
I think that's totally respectable too. I mean, at this point, like we're just throwing darts at a dartboard, man. Like,
Yeah, we're throwing darts at a dartboard, but I'm like at least trying to convince people, like, you know what? He made some damn good points. I agree with him.
nah, I think most people are in my circle at this point. They're like, yeah, I mean, we could do predictions all we want, but I mean, it is kind of roulette at this point. One of these teams is gonna win.
You just got to argue your point, man. You just got to think I'm right and everyone else is wrong. You just
That's
got to
what I'm
go with
saying with New York. I'm right, everybody else is wrong.
it. All right. I want to hear your argument for Florida here. Florida over London.
I think that Florida is a way better respawn team than in London. Like not even close, honestly. Like don't get me wrong, I think that London's made a lot of improvements over time. I think London is a far better search team. I mean, Weskins is lights out with a sniper. He's probably the best sniper in the game at this point. But I mean, one search map, they won't see a game 5 in my opinion. Florida's going to take both hard points. And Florida's probably going to take the Dom too because I've never been super impressed with London, other than when they played Atlanta, not last event but the event before. That Dom was unbelievable, absolutely nuts.
You mean the Chicago Dom?
What? No, it
Oh
was
no.
it was
Oh,
It was
okay,
Hackney
okay.
Yard.
A couple events ago. Yeah, yeah. Not the
Yeah,
Seattle
not
one, but the one before that. Okay.
yeah, not the Seattle one. It was last time Atlanta. It was Florida. It was
Yep.
Florida. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that one was incredibly close. That was
Yeah, it was a nail biter
uh,
for sure. But like I said,
yep.
a lot of stuff changes over time. So we'll
Yep,
see.
and I mean, looking at the respawn records for the London Royal Ravens in hardpoint, they're 13-16, and for Dom, they're 6-11. On the side of the Florida Mutineers in Dom, they're 12-9. In terms of hardpoint, they're 21-16. So, and it's not just like one map that they're dominating on. Well, it is for Dom.
Right.
Dom, they're St. Petrograd, they're 8-1 in that. So the best St. Petrograd hardpoint team domination team in the game currently is Florida. So that's a
Yes.
straight up ban. Gunrunner, they're 1-4 in Hackney, they're 3-4. So 3-4 is a respectable record. So probably St. Petrograd's insta ban for the London Royal Ravens, and then they're either gonna most likely Florida's gonna ban Gunrunner, so they're stuck playing them on Hackney, which they have a pretty even record on that. Florida's 3-4, London's 2-4, so somewhat close. However, the hard points is definitely where kind of Florida is going to have a bit of the edge on the London Royal Ravens, where
For sure.
they have a bunch of good maps in that mode. They're 5-2 on Gunrunner, 6-2 on Hackney, and then Ramasa they're 5-4. So the only bad hard point map that Florida has is St. Petrograd. So that's just that's just a ban there, and then they have a better record than London on all the other maps. So yeah, I made your argument for you. I used stats to prove myself completely wrong,
Stats.
but yeah. So you see the both sides of it. Could go Florida's way, could go London's way. We'll move on to our Group B losers round 2, which is going to be Atlanta versus Optic Gaming LA. Now, this one is a bit more interesting because I don't think OGLA has the same weakness in search and destroy as the New York Subliners do.
No, I agree with that.
And so you have OGLA taking this over the Atlanta FaZe 3-2.
Yeah, I think that's explicitly
I
because I mean, I, Optic is a good search and destroy team, and I could definitely see them pulling this out in the 3-2 fashion against Atlanta and just kind of shocking the world.
yes. I don't have this matchup because I had Atlanta beating New York.
Right.
I would have been on the border of agreeing with you because it's a very possible outcome. However, because I would have wanted to differ from your prediction, I probably would have gone Atlanta over OG. However, since I don't have that matchup, I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And so I have New York versus OG LA in a rematch. And since it is a rematch, I think it's going game 5. And I think Optic Gaming is going to take it over New York this time around.
That's fair.
I gave it to New York the first time they played it. I didn't think they would make it to a game 5 in that one. And so for that reason, it went to New York's favor. However, the second time around, second time OGLA have played a team in an event, it hasn't been pretty for the team on the receiving end of
True.
that rematch. So in this case, going to go with OGLA over New York in a game 5. Moving on to our semifinals. On your side of the bracket, you have, or I guess on your side of the predictions, you have Dallas versus OGLA, and you have Dallas taking that 3-1 over OGLA.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that Dallas's subs are way better than Optic subs at this point. Ilya and Shotzi have been absolutely lights out, and TJ has been pretty embarrassing, and Chino's been not that great. And yeah, it's just you lose your sub play and everything like that. Your ARs are comparable. I just see this going in the direction of Dallas pretty quickly in a 3-1.
Yeah, I would say on the side of Dallas, Dallas's subs have been looking much stronger than compared to OGLA's subs, even when OGLA's subs are kind of at their peak performance levels. And so I believe I also have this matchup of Dallas versus OGLA. I'm going to say it's going to be a bit closer just for the sake of disagreeing, but I'm going to say Dallas. I'm going to agree with you. Dallas takes it in the end, 3-2 over OGLA in the end. And so with that, we're going to move on to our second semifinals, which I'm going to have the Atlanta FaZe versus the London Royal Ravens. This is going to be very different from yours, which is going to be New York from Florida versus Florida, which you have New York taking 3-2.
Yep. Yeah, so I think, like I said, I think this is New York's event, and if anybody, I mean, I don't know if I would keep it at a 3-2, New York, Florida, but I could see it happening too. I think that neither of them are stellar search and destroy teams at this point, and
No, it's the second worst search and destroy team and the third worst search and destroy team.
so I could definitely see this going to a game 5. I think both their hard points are pretty solid for sure, and I think Florida's Dom is better than New York's Dom, so it is really kind of a toss up. They're both pretty solid teams. I'm gonna go ahead and give the benefit of the doubt to New York and call it
Whose Dom do you
3-2.
think's better?
Florida's.
Okay, yeah, I
Yeah,
was
no,
gonna
New
say.
York's New York's Dom's tragic, and like I said, you mean when you got guys like Zuma and Attach on one side, it's hard to ever really discount them on search and destroy. You know, like
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter how bad they've been throughout the season. Whenever you
yeah,
have
and
some legends like that,
Yeah, unless you see a Pharaoh go complete superstar, supernova
Goes
mode
Super Saiyan
again.
again.
Yeah.
Super Saiyan Pharaoh. Yeah, he's nuts. Lights out. Kid is nasty.
Yeah, this is another one where it's probably I think which match did we say was probably one of the most contested is going to be like one of the closest matches that we see.
New York Optic.
Uh, the New York Optic. This is probably the second closest one I think we could see if we do see a New York versus Florida matchup, simply because both teams haven't been looking great in search and destroy. Taken Florida pretty much 100% in the domination. I mean, New York's had some crazy leads in Dom that they've kind of thrown away. I remember
Yes.
they had like a 50-point lead on Atlanta. They had a crazy lead on Chicago. So they've had the leads at time. They've just thrown them away, and so the record's been bad, but they haven't necessarily looked bad throughout the entire Dom match. And Florida's only really had one map. New York's only had really one map. And so maybe they'll just both ban that and they'll go on a crapshoot on Gunrunner, which they both had their worst or second worst, I guess, since Florida or New York's never played St. Petrodome match record on for that mode. So, and then domination, they've both been looking pretty darn solid in that mode. So yeah, this is definitely a bit of a crapshoot for that one. That's where I'll agree with you. Where that one might as well just flip a coin in my
Yep.
eyes. However, for my other semifinal matchup, I have something completely different. I have the London Royal Ravens versus the Atlanta FaZe, and I'm going to give this to London over Atlanta. I'm going to give it to London over Atlanta. This is where I'm going to be a little bit crazy, so to say. London's looked pretty darn good in Search and Destroy. Atlanta's the best Search and Destroy team in the game. London haven't been looking that great at Dom. I think if we see the weekend kind of Atlanta with if they're not able to fix all of their mistakes and come back kind of with a vengeance in the respawn, that's kind of what I'm holding on to here. That Atlanta is not going to be able to keep a consistent form in their respawns throughout the entire event, and I think this is where it's going to crumble, and London's going to be able to take advantage of that and take the series over Atlanta.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I could 100% see that. I something tells me that Atlanta is not going to the finals this series.
And so for our finals, you're going to have Dallas versus New York. I'm going to have Dallas versus London. And I'm going to have Dallas take it 3-2 over the London Royal Ravens. You're going to have New York take it 3-1 over the Dallas Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that New York has the ability to beat teams like Dallas. And like I said, it can go either way here. Dallas is a phenomenal team, don't get me wrong. But there's nothing that says, Dallas is unbeatable in any stretch of the imagination. So when it comes to big moments like this, Dallas has a tendency to choke more times than they clutch. So we'll see. We'll see where they go from there.
Yeah, I have Dallas taking it over London 3-2. And I mean, that was kind of what we saw the last time these two teams. Obviously, it was different rosters, at least for London, and it was a long time ago. Um, but we did see that reverse sweep. And right now, I cannot confidently, even though I gave London the win over Atlanta. However, I think Atlanta, the form that we saw them in at the past event was not pretty. And we say that even though they made the final, which is still crazy to think, but like kind of with how Atlanta looked in the respawns, they didn't look clean. And so with that, I think London can take advantage of that. However, Dallas at the past event still looked incredibly clean in the games they played. Yes, they got reverse swept by Atlanta. However, outside of that, they still put up probably the second best performance out of any of the teams at that event. They took a convincing series over against Minnesota, and then they pushed the Florida Mutineers all the way to a round 11 game 5, which is the farthest any team pushed them at that event. So For that reason, I'm going to give it to Dallas over the London Royal Ravens 3-2 at this time.
And
I think
that's
Dallas is just a bit better.
totally respectable too. I mean, like I said, at this point,
I want you to argue against me, man. We need to get like some more Stephen A stuff. I just need to bring in some like wild card dude. We're too friendly with each other. We're always like, yeah, I can see your points. You made some good points, but
yeah. Well, at this point, it's really hard to argue anything after just getting brutalized by predictions in in the Minnesota home series event. That was
yeah.
just that was
I
just
mean, I think we're both feeling pretty meek after our Minnesota prediction.
for sure.
But not as meek as Nameless probably felt after his abysmal Seattle homestand predictions.
Yeah, that was pretty tough too.
But that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. We're going to have some pretty good matches. I mean, I think all the matches are pretty good at this point, sense of how competitive the league is, and it's really nice that we're getting some Call of Duty so quickly. Back-to-back weekends, I'm excited. I get to sit back and watch some more COD this weekend, so that's nice. Don't have that week break. However, it's going to be a bit crazy for the podcast. So, but next week we'll be back to that 2-week break, so be able to get an episode out with ample time, thankfully. But I hope you guys all enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Later. Damn, can't get a haircut from Uncle Frank.
No, dude, he's the only guy I trust with my hair because all the other people screw it up. I tried going to Great Clips, sucked.
Well,
Never
yeah,
going
you went to
again.
Great Clips. The hell did you think was gonna happen?
All right, okay. I went to Mug and Brush too. They charge like $30 a haircut, bro. What?
You're gonna look like Celium with a Great Clips haircut.
Hey, he's got some nice curls. No,
Oh
like,
man,
bro,
you look like
I don't
from
get
Mac
what.
Melts to Celium with a Great Clips cut.
Donnie Temp's haircut last year was bad. He had a bad haircut last year, if we're gonna talk about haircuts. But like,
I wonder,
dude, you can't get a haircut here without it costing like 30 some bucks. I was looking for like places to get a haircut, just a haircut, and there was like nothing. It was like, oh, you got to pay $40. We'll give you a craft beer and cut your hair. I'm like, I don't want that. The other places like, oh, we'll give you a consultation and we'll do like some face massage shit. I'm like, I just want my haircut, dude. I can massage my own face and buy my own beer. I don't need you to do that for me. Like, dude, I can go to his place and get a haircut for like $12.
yeah, sounds like you're not paying your barber enough. That's real
his
tough.
price. That's his regular price for like the place that he was running. Haircut was like $12. Haircut and beard, $14. Those were his prices.
That's tough.
Those were his full prices. Well, no, that's just what he did. The guy was retired. He's living a nice life. He's like, I'd be bored if I wasn't doing this. So he like comes in 3 days a week or something, cuts some hair for a couple of hours, and it's out. Like, we're gonna jump into this now.
Oh, we've
okay?
been recording, so.
I know it's gonna go at the end though. So it's gonna go at the end. So
All right,
yeah.
Let me find this Google Drive. I don't even want to look at the predictions this time.
You did better than me.
I know, but still. I mean, I'm not upset because, Mutant Years won, but
Wait,
still.
why? I thought you would be upset about that because you're all right.
No, I mean, like,
I'll dog you on the Mutineers.
That's fine. I'll be a homer anyway. Whatever. You didn't even have him in the semifinals. What are you gonna dog me for?
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't. I had them in the semis.
You did have him in the semis.
No, I just didn't figure they'd, beat Atlanta flatly.
Yeah, but you're also like you were also saying, yeah, they're gonna feel really stupid for benching Pristini.
Okay, well.
yeah, okay.
That's fair.
You got everything up?
Yeah, we're good to go.